Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello and welcome to the Afternoon Agenda with me, Alex Phillips. Now, this show is all about your opinion and mine. It's not news as you know it, but discussion and debate on things that are, or really should be, on your agenda. So, with that in mind, here's what we'll be covering today. MP Owen Paterson resigns in the Cash for Access row, but will the controversy stick to the Conservative Party? The focus turns to energy at COP26. Is it time we embrace nuclear energy? We'll ask why so many environmentalists are opposed to it. And it may not be on the agenda of traditional news outlets, but we need to talk about comedy. Is cancel culture killing the laughter? That's the agenda for the next hour. But what's on yours? You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me @gbnews. But first, it's time for the news headlines with Polly.
Good afternoon. The news for you at 4 o'clock on GB News. The former MP Claudia Webbe has been handed a suspended 10-week jail sentence after being convicted of harassment. She made phone calls to Michelle Merritt, a long-term friend of her partner Lester Thomas, and threatened to throw acid in her face. The Chief Magistrate described her behaviour as callous and intimidatory. Owen Paterson has announced he's resigning as the MP for North Shropshire. The former Tory cabinet minister, who faced suspension for breaching lobbying rules, said in a statement, "The last 2 years have been an indescribable nightmare for my family and me. I maintain that I'm totally innocent of what I have been accused of. I will remain a public servant, but outside the cruel world of politics." Well, that announcement came after the government decided to hold a second vote on parliamentary disciplinary procedures. Thousands of care home staff could lose their jobs next week because they aren't fully vaccinated against COVID. NHS data shows that over 49,000 workers, that's around 1 in 10 of the total number, haven't received 2 doses. The government's made it mandatory for employees in registered care homes in England to have both jabs. Now, the first pill designed to treat coronavirus has been approved by the UK medicines regulator. The tablet will be given to patients recently diagnosed with COVID and for those who are vulnerable to illnesses like diabetes or heart disease. In clinical trials, the drug, developed by a US company, cut the risk of hospitalisation or death. Cervical cancer rates are almost 90% lower in women who had the HPV vaccine as children. A study published in The Lancet has looked at the incidence rates in those who had the jab when they were at school, and it found that those in their 20s who'd had the dose between the ages of 12 and 13 were far less likely to develop the disease compared to those who were unvaccinated. Cancer Research UK described the findings as historic. More than 40 countries, including the UK, have pledged to quit using coal, the single biggest contributor to climate change. The commitments were made during the COP26 summit in Glasgow, following a UK-led coal-to-clean power transition plan. Countries, including Poland, Vietnam and Chile, have vowed to phase out coal power in the 2030s. Poorer nations have until the 2040s. Australia, India, China and the US, some of the largest consumers of coal, did not sign up to the pledge. But COP26 President Alok Sharma remains optimistic.
I do believe that the end of coal is in sight. I do believe we're getting to a point where we consign coal power to history. A brighter future comes ever closer, a future of cleaner air, cheaper power and good green jobs.
The cricketer Azim Rafiq says the problem with a racial slur used against him by a teammate is that it's about institutional racism rather than the use of these specific words. Posting on Twitter, the 30-year-old who played for Yorkshire County Cricket Club said the sport he loves needs reform and change. The former England cricketer Gary Ballance has admitted using a slur against Rafiq and that he regrets saying it. A bird flu prevention zone has been declared across Britain after a rise in detection of the disease amongst birds. It'll be a legal requirement now for all bird keepers to follow strict biosecurity measures to help protect their flocks. The chief veterinary officers of England, Wales and Scotland say the actions must now be taken to prevent flu spreading further to other poultry and domestic birds. Officials say the risk to the public is very low. That's it. You're up to date. I'm back in half an hour. Now let's get back to the afternoon agenda. Here's Alex.
Hello, you're with the afternoon agenda and we need to talk about comedy. Laughter is the best medicine, goes the old adage. Throughout the history of humanity, comedy has been a bonding experience, something shared, usually in kindness and jest, a way of breaking down barriers and building bridges, of de-stressing a situation or making light of sadness, a touch of comic relief. From Aristophanes to Shakespeare, Molière to Michael McIntyre, humans have devised many forms of humour, through satire to sarcasm, slapstick to situational, stand-up to sitcoms, spoofs to sketches. The art of laughter has been a long-standing and vital tradition in every language of the world. Well, not anymore. It seems that the woketeers want to gag gags, ban banter and make us all quit wit. A conveyor belt of comics have voiced their concerns about censorship creep in their industry. John Cleese, Jennifer Saunders, Ricky Gervais and Billy Connolly, to name a few, who have voiced concern at the prickly, overly sensitive response to humorous content by a minority in society determined to whip up synthetic offence. Dave Chappelle has been in the news lately, playing to the gallery with routines on subjects he knows will trigger backlash, having been the subject of a cancel campaign over his previous Netflix shows and determined not to back down. But with so much humour apparently now off limits, alongside the ever-growing litany of offensive subject matters and trigger warnings on anything made a second before, well, yesterday, what can and can't a quip today is so complex, it's easier for everyday folk to not even try, lest risk upsetting someone. But what about those to whom it's a livelihood? But perhaps the greatest risk of comedy cancel culture is the disturbing common denominator of assumed unpleasantness, that no matter the butt of the joke, it is automatically taken not to be good-natured, but designed to hurt, undermine and mock. This perverse translation of cheer into challenge is deeply worrying and affects us all. For when the laughter stops, it really is no laughing matter. Today, we need to talk about comedy. Well, what better way to kick this conversation off than speaking to the brilliant comedian Abby Roberts, who joins me now in the studio. And we also have Mark Tuggan, the founder of the famous Glee Comedy Club, in the studio too. Abby,
hello.
Mark, welcome. Abby, I'm going to start with you. You are a comedian. This is you ply your trade telling jokes. Have you ever had the people heckle you and boo you because of the content of what you're saying, because they're offended?
I've had lots of heckles. I'm quite good with dealing with heckles, especially if they're big men built like this. I usually just drink their pint in one go and then turn the glass upside down the table. That's usually how I deal with it. That's how most comedians worth their salt. Not everyone has the same style as me, but if you go back to people in America like Sam Kinison, George Carlin, people like that, they challenged, they were outraged, out there to. It's almost like you want the atmosphere to be a bit. Oh, are we going there? On the edge. You want women to, have tenor ladies just in case. You do not want somebody coming out and saying, and now, before I begin, I'd like to give you a sermon on how many pronouns there are. You do not want that in comedy. Comedy is sacred in the sense that it should be a place where everything, where the most freedom is had. And at the moment, we're seeing chip, chip, chip away at it. It's very worrying.
When you're writing your material, do you ever have that thing where you think, oh, should I include this? Is that going to be a bit too risky? Is that going to be too on edge? Is this going to create controversy? Do you find yourself actually self-limiting?
I wish I did, but I don't know. I don't. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't. I think there needs to be more comedians. I mean, I know there are a few of us who are quite sort of, we'll say what we mean, but actually I don't. I write my stuff, I put it out there, and frankly, if an audience member, if they don't like it, they can walk out. You bought a ticket, maybe I'm not your cup of tea, they can leave. But I have to say, nobody's left. And I hate this new puritanism that's happening in comedy. I mean, to be honest, it's like if these people were in charge of people's sex lives, they'd be there in the bedroom going, 3 out of 10. We don't want that in comedy. We don't want people sort of being censorious about comedy.
And Mark, I mean, you run a network of comedy clubs. Do you choose the people who come into your clubs based upon whether they're going to be safe? Do you think, well, I can't have that person, they're too controversial? Or you open the doors to anybody?
I want to continue to open my doors to anyone and everyone, and I did not I got into this business precisely because of the craziness and the anarchy and the anything goes attitude, but I'm concerned that what's creeping into my inbox, and this is a phenomenon just of the last couple of years, it's what I call professional offence taking. So my inbox will have, I took offence at this, I took offence at that, and it's usually somebody taking offence on behalf of another fictional, made-up character. And I don't really know how to deal with it. It's tough.
And what do? Do you just reply saying, I'm sorry if you find that offensive, but we are a comedy store and that's, that's the material we apply?
At the moment, I am pushing back. I'm saying, look, I'm sorry if you were offended, but look, I'm going to put on whoever's funny.
And have you had the baying mob at your doorstep at all, sort of, yelling outside? Have they turned up with their placards yet?
Not yet. But look, my fear is, and the comics that I do speak to who can talk to me candidly, they do say to me, we are auditing our act. We are checking what we say. Because if you think about it as a job in comic, that 3-second gag can end your life and end your career. Why take the risk?
Yeah,
that is a shame.
That's sad, isn't it, Abby?
Very true.
Because actually, we're going to end up with a very narrow and beige definition of what's funny if we continue down this road.
Yeah, very, very beige. In fact, I'm going to say it's lovely to meet Mark. I've played all of Mark's clubs. We've never actually met in person, but I would say the Glee is such a great atmosphere. I mean, they're probably the best clubs in the country, I would say, and I'd love a gig, thanks, in next week. But what I think is happening is there are people, not only comedians themselves who are censoring other comics, which is a bit like Mao's China. We have people sort of checking, literally people going, yeah, that was a bit, maybe too, you're going straight into the wrong territory. But you've also got people in charge of comedy. I mean, the people who run the Edinburgh Fringe Award, Nika Burns, she said in 2018, I look forward to the woke comedy when there'll be a new kind of comedy in town. Well, thanks a lot, Nika, because this is what's happened. People are nervous. Comedians shouldn't be nervous.
Do you know many comedians who've sort of given up, fallen on their sword, who've, actually come under huge pressure?
Janie Godley.
Janie Godley.
Just recently.
Yeah. Janie Godley and I...
What was her crime?
Yeah, sorry, Mark, you explain.
She was found guilty, having some people gone through her historic tweets. Offence. They call it offence archaeology. But what she said, it wasn't acceptable. But why couldn't people just accept her apology?
Yeah.
Why couldn't people just say accept the fact that she made a mistake?
Yeah.
But then who does decide what is acceptable and what isn't? When you say that you don't self-limit, but other people, Mark, you said some of the people who do acts in your club say that they've sort of audited their content to make sure there aren't going to be clangers in there that are going to bring the mob to your door. But Who are the mob? Who decides this stuff? I mean, the trigger warnings on old content. Who's there thinking, well, you know, we've got a list here of all the things that might cause offence, and today it's time for Little Britain to go in the bin?
It's the corporates. What's really worrying about this, and that's why I get very, very annoyed when people compare this to Mary Whitehouse. Mary Whitehouse was on the Christian right. She was very much about moralising. And, you know, it was quite a sort of, I mean, she put it this way, she didn't change institutions from within. She didn't put all her feelings into everything. This is much, much more serious. This is across everything now. So we need, if anything, you know, on Mark's behalf, on his club's behalf, on my behalf, we need more comedians to say, no, we're not playing that game. We're not going to do it. Or we'll bifurcate comedy. We'll have the funny people and then the others.
Well, do you remember when we first got going, comics almost used to compete with each other just as to how quickly they could make
silence a room
play, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Nowadays, I think that's just just not happening.
Yeah.
It's like how quickly can you do that risque joke?
Yes, exactly.
Because I felt that at one point we sort of reached a peak of offensive comedy almost. How offensive can you get with people such as Frankie Boyle, who really were sort of shock tactics sometimes? And you just think, you know, now I don't know what content comedians can cover. Do you find yourself thinking, you know, these subjects are probably off limits? Or do you think when it comes to comedians, whatever you are, whatever your taste, there is nothing off limits?
I don't think there is anything that's off limits in comedy. No, because comedy, like I said, is the one place. That's why I think it's interesting that the few comics like myself are speaking out, because we realise how important it is. Because comedy is, isn't it? It's the kind of linchpin of free speech. And if that starts to slip away, if we can't have sort of, you know, have that wonderful frisson where everything's a bit bristling, then we're in serious trouble, I think, in lots of other areas.
I mean,
you'll have to forgive me, but one of the great things about most of the comics I know is that, forgive me, they are quite thin-skinned. In other words, if the audience doesn't laugh,
yes, exactly.
How long do you think that joke's going to stay in the set?
Precisely.
So, you know, it's really simple.
Yeah.
If it's funny, keep it in.
Exactly.
If it's not,
yes.
leave it out. Let the audience decide.
Precisely. It's democracy in action. Let the audience. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about Dave Chappelle, because obviously that's the most recent person who is being hounded, your big name person being hounded for his previous shows on Netflix. And it seems to be very much, I watched his latest one the other day, and he's really socking it to his critics, isn't he? He's saying, you're telling me not to enter into this territory, I'm going to go there. Do you think that was a wise decision? Is that the sort of affirmative action that we need to see happening? Or is that sort of potentially agitating people and stirring things up that could become unhelpful?
I am glad that Dave Chappelle is pushing back, because we need the really big names to go, you know what, enough's enough. It's not going to be enough, again, for, you know, a circuit comic to push back on it, because they don't have that power.
Yeah.
And I was interested to say as well that, you know, even Chris Rock, who's somebody that he was one of my sort of comedy heroes. He's been quoted recently as saying, you know, guys, the problem is everyone's too scared to make a move.
Exactly.
And that's his way of saying, well, look, you know, if even people like Chris Rock are holding back, what's it coming to?
Yeah.
What signal is that sending out to the whole
Exactly. And also, you're right, actually, weirdly, a lot of this has come from America. Even, I have to say, God bless Dave Chappelle, I'm a huge fan, but even he in the past has kind of been a bit, you know, saying, I remember him saying he felt that the laughter, some of his jokes, was the wrong kind of laughter. This was a few years ago, so maybe he should, and then he left his show. If you do things like that, you're kind of sowing the seeds, you know. Although I think Dave's wonderful, but you know that's the truth of the matter.
I mean, when it comes to what you call offence archaeology, are there sort of previous comics and comedians you think, well, it is about right that they're in the dustbin of history? Or do you think that everyone should have the opportunity to be resurrected, even if right now, I mean, evidently there were jokes, especially if we go back, you know, 5 decades or something like that, that would make most people today think, oh gosh, you know, not the sort of thing we say today.
I think everybody understands that tastes change and attitudes change, and you know, I want to put on record that I actually think one of the sort of biggest moments for me personally in comedy when I saw the old guard moving to the new guard was when, you know, Bernard Manning was on the Mrs. Merton show, and when she, you know, when that amazing moment came when she called him out and he actually sort of said, yeah, I am a racist. And it's almost as if that was a good moment for comedy, because it was the moment at which the tectonic plates shifted from, yes, we've moved on from that onto the new. So we all accept that what was acceptable in the 60s and the 70s is less acceptable now, or not acceptable now. We get that, but I'm just fearful that there's still a mob that's out to get almost anything that they deem to be just not to their taste.
And that mob's
gone the other way.
Yeah.
It's tipped over the other way.
Pendulum swing.
Yes.
It's just
it's a
swung a
wrecking
bit too
ball
far.
now.
It swung way over to the over to Maoist China somewhere.
Indeed. Mark, Abby, thank you so much, and keep
Thank
people
you.
laughing. My word, after the year we've had, we need it.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming in. It's been a pleasure. Well, we're continuing this conversation throughout the show, and I want to know what you think. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can also tweet me at gbnews, and there's a poll up right now asking, is cancel culture killing comedy? Cast your vote so I know what you, the nation, really thinks. Now, coming up after the break, we'll get the latest on Conservative MP Owen Paterson following his resignation. All that, but first let's have a little look at the weather forecast.
Hi there. Still some showers around this afternoon, but for most, it's a cracking afternoon, dry and bright, still feeling on the cold side before it turns a bit milder during the next few days. A change in the weather on the way. We're cutting off the cold northerly winds that we've seen over the last few days. We're replacing them with westerlies, but during the next 24 hours, well, that's the transition period. And so for many, showers easing this evening, clearing skies then, a touch of frost overnight. Initially for parts of southern Scotland, much of England and Wales, but through the night, areas of cloud sink south from the northwest, with some light outbreaks of rain in places. But of course, that cloud blanket will lift the temperatures in the north, whilst it will be another frosty start in the south, with temperatures in rural spots a little below freezing. Nevertheless, that's where the brightest skies will be first thing, London, Norwich, much of southeast England seeing that sunshine until around lunchtime. Elsewhere, the cloud continues to topple southwards, and by the afternoon, actually, most places are seeing these layers of cloud. But there will still be some sunny breaks, and temperatures will be a little higher, 11 to 13 Celsius generally, and most will see a dry day. But there will be some light outbreaks of rain for parts of north and west Scotland, northwest England and North Wales. For bonfire night, it looks like reasonable weather for most fireworks displays, I should imagine. But through the night, particularly after midnight, it turns wet and windy in the north and west of Scotland, and then later on parts of Northern Ireland. This more active weather system moving in will lead to heavy rain, particularly over the West Highlands on the morning of Saturday. A mild start to the day everywhere, but a wet start there for western Scotland with some strong winds. The winds turn even stronger in the far north and northwest on Saturday night, tending to be a little drier further south and also milder.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
The MP at the centre of the Cash for Access row has resigned. Owen Paterson, the Conservative MP for North Shropshire, was found to have broken lobbying rules and was facing suspension until Tory MPs blocked it. They'd called for an overhaul of the MP's standards watchdog instead. But today, the government U-turned on the standards watchdog issue and a revote was planned on blocking the suspension. Owen Paterson referred to his wife Rose, who took her own life, in his statement. The last few days have been intolerable for us. Worst of all, we're seeing people, including MPs, publicly mock and deride Rose's death and belittle our Mike. My children have therefore asked me to leave politics altogether for my sake as well as theirs. I agree with them. I do not want my wife's reputation and memory to become a political football. Above all, I will always put my family first. Well, Deputy Political Editor for the Daily Mail, John Stevens, joins me now. John, great to have you on the show. Was this a surprise? I mean, when Tory U-turns are not a surprise, but they all sort of piled in behind Owen Paterson and were very quick to withdraw their support.
Yeah, I think Downing Street were quite surprised by the ferocity of the public opinion yesterday. I mean, they like to call themselves the people's government, but on this one, they were on completely the wrong side of the argument from the public. And there was so much anger. MPs were already getting lots of emails and letters from angry constituents saying, hang on a minute, what on earth is going on here? And just to recap what happened with Owen Paterson, he earned £500,000 from these two firms over a few years. Then he's accused of breaking the rules by lobbying on their behalf. The Committee on Standards and the Commissioner for Standards both found him guilty of breaking those rules. But rather than waving through the 30-day suspension, which they said he should have, the government decided it wasn't going to do that. It was going to start looking at the rules again, set up some new sham committee to make its own verdict on whether Owen Paterson's suspension should go through. And obviously they've realised that just is not sustainable and they've rode back from that today.
But, I mean, do you think that there is a climate out there to change the way that the standards watchdog works as such? Or was this literally just a sort of fabricated concern in order to save one of their own?
I mean, the government have said that there are two different issues here. There's the issue of the Owen Paterson case, and also there are concerns about how the standards process has been handled. I mean, I think it was quite convenient for them yesterday to mangle these two issues together and try and make it look like they weren't trying to just let Owen Paterson get off without his punishment, claiming there's more of a wider issue going on here. But I think the government's going to find it hard to reform that body now. You know, Labour just have said already that they just don't trust the Tories on this one anymore. And I think it's very difficult for the government to be able to get through any sort of proper and meaningful reform.
I mean, the Labour Party have certainly really tried to make Tory sleaze stick, haven't they? And there have been a litany of offences, from Dominic Cummings going to Barnard Castle to Matt Hancock and, you know, his rather insalubrious activities in his office, and now the case of Owen Paterson. But the accusation doesn't seem to be sticking, does it?
No, and as you say, you know, Labour seems to come up with Tory sleaze is back as their attack line at any opportunity. We've heard it several times in the last year. But I think there is a cloud gathering around the government. This is a story that does seem to be getting some cut through. You listen to MPs and they're absolutely furious about what's gone on the last couple of days. Tory MPs yesterday were ordered to vote down this suspension and change the way that the Standards Committee operates. And just hours after they did that, took all the flack for doing that, the government have U-turned. And you had people like Kwasi Kwarteng, the business secretary, out on the broadcast round this morning defending what the government was doing. And then hours later, the government admitting what they were doing was not the right thing and they weren't going to do it anymore. I think that damage can't be undone. I think it's there. And I think MPs will face a lot of flack for playing a part in this awful scandal.
It does seem to me that this government is one that will make a decision, and then as soon as they get a whisper of discontent from newspaper headlines or focus groups or whatever it may be, they back away really quickly.
Yeah, although I think on this one they have been much more quick to change course. Remember with Matt Hancock, it went on for several days with Boris Johnson saying he thought the case was closed, and then as the row got bigger and bigger, he finally had to admit it hasn't been closed, and Matt Hancock had to lose his job. Obviously, he hung on to Dominic Raab when there was the row over Afghanistan and only moved him in a reshuffle weeks later. And if you go way, way back, remember Robert Jenrick, the housing secretary, and that row over his links with a Tory donor, he wasn't let go for months and months and months until the reshuffle that's just happened. So I think Boris Johnson in the past has been very keen to ride out these scandals and has been quite stubborn and felt he's in charge of the country. He's the Prime Minister with an 80-strong majority. Why should he listen to newspapers? But this time he seems to have realised that he needs to change course quite quickly.
I mean, the thing is with opposition benches trying to attack the Conservative Party over this is one would say it's always a bit dangerous to throw stones in glass houses, and they haven't exactly showered themselves in glory with recent prison sentences and trials. There's a sentencing today for Claudia Webbe. But are there any calls now to change the rules entirely? Are there people saying it's about time to get rid of any confusion that MPs just do not have second jobs?
Well, I've not heard much of that. I mean, I think the government will still be pushing on this reform agenda of the Standards Committee. And Boris Johnson has previously clashed with the Standards Commissioner over his holiday in Mustique and other issues. I think there's lots of people in the government who would like to do away the system and change how it works. But as I say, I just don't think there's going to be much of an appetite from other parties to change the system to effectively help the Tory party.
John, always lovely speaking to you. We love having you on this programme. You're almost like the sleaze watcher of Westminster. John Sleazewatch Stevens is what you should call yourself. Next time there's a scandal, remember, we love hearing from you. That's John Stevens, the Deputy Political Editor of the Daily Mail, who keeps politicians right. Now, coming up, it's Energy Day at COP26 in Glasgow. We'll ask why so many environmentalists are opposed to nuclear. That's next, but first, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Thanks very much. Your headlines this hour. The former MP Claudia Webbe has been handed a 10-week custodial sentence, suspended for 2 years and 200 hours of community service after being convicted of harassment. The 56-year-old politician was convicted last month at Westminster Court of harassing Michelle Merritt, a long-term friend of her partner, Lester Thomas, by threatening to throw acid in her face. In a court statement, Miss Merritt said Webbe made her feel very uncomfortable in public, vulnerable in her own home. Owen Paterson has announced he's resigning as MP for North Shropshire. The former Tory cabinet minister, who faced suspension for breaching lobbying rules, said in a statement, "The last 2 years have been an indescribable nightmare for my family and me." He also said, "I maintain that I am totally innocent of what I have been accused of," adding, "I will remain a public servant, but outside the cruel world of politics." That announcement came after the government decided to hold a second vote on parliamentary disciplinary procedures. Thousands of care home staff could lose their jobs next week because they aren't fully vaccinated against COVID. NHS data shows that over 49,000 workers, that's around 1 in 10 of the total, haven't received 2 doses. The government has made it mandatory for employees in registered care homes in England to have both jabs. So far, 89% of staff working in older age care homes have received 2 vaccine doses. That's all from me. I'm back in half an hour.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back to the afternoon agenda, and a reminder today that we're talking comedy, and we've been asking you, is cancel culture killing the laughter? Bobby says comedy in this country finished after the last episode of Only Fools and Horses. Oh, come on, there's been funny stuff since then. Tom says cancel culture is not killing comedy, just the places we normally go to find it. Yeah, true. Logan says it's killed it already. What is left is reduced to the sanitised and sterile version of a comedian. Martin says comedy died years ago when political correctness raised its ugly head. You can't joke about anything these days, as some idiot will take offence. James says only left-wing comedians are allowed on TV. That is why it's dead. Thank you for all your views. Keep them coming in. Now, it's Energy Day at COP26 in Glasgow. More than 40 countries, including the UK, have pledged to quit using coal, the single biggest contributor to climate change. Countries including Poland, Vietnam and Chile have vowed to phase out coal power in the 2030s. Poorer nations have until the 2040s to make the transition. However, some of the largest consumers of coal, Australia, India, China and the US, did not sign up. Well, let's cross live to Glasgow now, where our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, is live for us. And Darren, the big focus today is reducing fossil fuels. But if the biggest consumers of coal are not playing ball, what's the point?
Yeah, indeed, and that is the question that many people are asking actually today at COP. We've heard the Prime Minister, haven't we, Alex, banging on about coal, cars, cash and trees over the last 6 months or so. Well, he did trees, we did cash yesterday, it is coal today. Pretty major significant announcement when it comes to countries phasing out coal, as you say, by 2030, others by 2040. And it will make a difference. For example, Poland, which is very heavily reliant on coal, is going to be part of that scheme. And that is a significant move, particularly here in Europe. But you are also entirely right in saying the United States has not signed up to this. China has not signed up to this. India has not signed up to this. They are the biggest users of coal in the world. So what difference would it actually make? And you have to remember, coal is the largest contributor to greenhouse gases of any fossil fuel, essentially of any substance that we use in the world today. I think where the United States particularly would say it is trying to help out is that it's trying to help finance developing countries wean themselves off coal. So, for example, and it's not just the United States, Britain has taken part in this as well. South Africa has been paid, I think, £6.2 billion in recent years, and will do for the next couple of years, to try and help it transition away from its use of coal. And that may be a plan that other developing countries might want to use as well. It is interesting that actually the UK is quite an outlier in all of this, maybe a good outlier depending on your perspective, in that we have really essentially weaned ourselves off coal to a large degree, but in the end we're just a very small player. We only contribute 1% of total global emissions. China's up there at 25, 26, 27%. In saying that, and it's not just coal, they're talking about oil and gas as well today, many also quite frustrated that this conference doesn't seem to be talking about nuclear an awful lot as an alternative to fossil fuels. Yes, there's an awful lot of focus on renewables, like wind and sun and solar and else and other things as well, Alex. But in the end, what happens, you know, when the wind doesn't really blow that strongly, as we saw in September here in the UK? Again, suggestions that not just here in Britain, but elsewhere, that nuclear energy really should be on the table and should be properly talked about here at COP and indeed elsewhere.
Thank you ever so much, Darren. And a nice little segue there, as nuclear is my very next topic. Darren McCaffrey, our political editor at COP26. So, as we're going to give up fossil fuels, it seems, why aren't we more enthusiastic about nuclear power? Joining me now is Admiral Mike Hewitt, Chief Executive of IP3, which promotes secure nuclear power in the global marketplace, and Ruth London from the Fuel Poverty Action Group, who is against nuclear energy. Mike, I'm going to start off with you. Give me the lowdown, a brief synopsis. Why is nuclear the way forward, and particularly the sort of nuclear that you are wanting the world to invest in, small modular reactors?
Well, I think, first off, understand that nuclear power is a emissions-free, always-on source of energy. It's the cleanest source of energy we have, even more so than wind and solar. Take the United States as a country that really has a robust energy mix. 20% of our electricity is generated by nuclear power, but that accounts for over 50% of our clean energy production. There's over 450 reactors operating in the globe today, and there's another 300 gigawatts of new capacity that's being demanded by the globe. Many of these countries understand that to meet their carbon reduction goals, they've attempted to use renewable energy, and that is an important part of the mix. But for many of these countries to actually maintain the kind of abundant baseload power that they need and to be clean, they need to include nuclear power in their energy mix. And so I think from a climate change perspective, if you look at Paris, and we identified a 2 degrees Celsius temperature rise as a goal. It's a very broad goal. There really wasn't a lot of structure of how to get there. But I think, unfortunately, most of the focus since Paris has been on renewable energy. And we really haven't seen any of the decarbonization that we were looking for. And so I think the importance of looking at climate change as an existential threat really means we need to look at all the solutions that are available to us to meet that abundant baseload demand for the planet.
Now, Ruth, I think, Mike's made a quite convincing case. So there are 450 reactors around the globe already. It's the cleanest source of energy. Why are you opposed to it?
Well, he says it's the cleanest, but, you can't blame renewable energy for the fact that the decarbonisation has proceeded so slowly. The money has not been poured into renewable energy. The money has been poured into fossil fuels, and that is continuing to happen. Hundreds of millions of dollars from governments internationally, even last year, even in 2020, were going towards fossil fuels, oil and gas development and so on. And the oil companies basically have the world in a stranglehold. We just wrote today, Fuel Poverty Action just wrote to Alok Sharma, pointing to the huge windfall profits that these companies are now making and saying that those profits and the subsidies that are now being paid by governments, they should go instead to investing in renewables. And then you will see decarbonization. And you'll see it without the dangers of nuclear energy, because you might say it's clean, but what about all that waste? What about the radiation? What about the cancers? What about the risk of terrorism, which now you're talking about putting onto a local level as well as in one big place? All of those things are things that have been concerned people about nuclear for generations now, and they haven't gone away.
Well, Mike, I'm going to put those to you then. What about the risks involved? Because, we saw with Fukushima and, of course, the famous incident in Chernobyl, that when things go wrong with nuclear, they can go very wrong, can't they?
I think it's important to understand exactly those. Let's talk about the big three accidents that we tend to refer to when we talk about the history of nuclear power. 3 Mile Island in America was not an accident at all, but it was a system that shut itself down because there was a failure. It worked exactly as advertised. There was never any radiation exposure. Fukushima, no one died from radiation exposure. It was a tsunami that killed people. And then really Chernobyl was gross negligence on the part of, at the time, the Soviet Union. And even then, the life of that program, maybe there were 50 deaths. So I think it's important to look at nuclear power pragmatically when it comes to safety. I actually agree with Ruth. I think that we haven't done enough on the clean side of the ledger to actually get out of fossil fuel. I think the challenge is most of these nations need abundant power. And when you're asking a nation that doesn't have enough electricity to decarbonize over what's affordable and available today, it really is a challenge for these nations to take on the challenge of decarbonizing. I think it's somewhat hubris of the United Kingdom and the United States to go to COP26 when, in fact, we're offering up a solution that works in our countries for net zero. It doesn't work in most of the other countries. If you look at most of the renewable energy production globally, it's been within 7 or 8 countries that already had robust power, had the luxury of pursuing renewable energy. We need to find a solution that works for the entire planet. And I am a huge advocate of renewable energy. And I think with the advent of small modular reactors and advanced reactors, they can complement the development of renewable energy and actually become a baseload power that works alongside wind and solar. So I actually think that Ruth is saying the exact right thing. The safety and concern about nuclear power has never penciled out in fact. And let me finally say that it's the only industry, the most heavily regulated industry on the planet, by the way, that accounts for both the decommissioning of the plant and the storage, safe storage of their waste for the life of the program before they put a shovel in the ground. I will also tell you that renewable energy really has not accounted at all for its waste with solar panels, wind turbines, and the like. So I think it's important that we not attack each other, but really talk about what are the solutions that are clean and emissions free. And hydro, renewable, and nuclear power all have a seat at that table.
Yeah, I mean, Ruth, when you look at this last year, we know that the wind has not blown as much as normally, and so we haven't been able to garner as much energy from our wind energy facilities, our turbines, both onshore and offshore, and that has created a very difficult situation, partnered with we haven't been following liquid gas storage, partnered with the fact that Russia's playing political games over gas pipelines and artificially making prices go up. And it's going to leave a lot of people in fuel poverty. But when it comes to nuclear, this doesn't add to climate change, and it has the ability to produce a lot of energy and consistently. Are you beginning to be persuaded by some of Mike's arguments?
You know, there's another factor which hasn't been even mentioned, and that is insulation. You know, the best energy is the energy that you don't need at all. And if a small proportion of what's been invested in nuclear had been invested in insulating our homes, people would be warmer, we'd be healthier, there'd be more energy to spare for the things that really need it, and the cost would be minimal. Because that energy that we don't use, you know, it goes on giving, and it goes on giving for free.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to jump in because we've got to pass live to another story right now, but thank you both for joining me and having that fascinating debate today. Now, former Labour MP for Leicester East, Claudia Webbe, has been handed a suspended 10-week jail sentence and 200 hours community service at Westminster Magistrates Court after being convicted of harassment. She was convicted last month of harassing Michelle Merritt, a long-term friend of her partner, Lester Thomas, by threatening to throw acid in her face. Well, let's get more on this now with GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White, who is live outside Westminster Magistrates Court. Mark, has Claudia left the courts yet? Have you heard any reaction from her to this sentencing?
No reaction from her as yet, but as far as we understand from her defence team, she maintains the posture that she adopted after being found guilty last month of harassment, effectively saying that her comments were taken out of context and that she is the victim here, not Michelle Merritt, this 59-year-old very good friend of her partner, Lester Thomas. Now, she has not come out of court yet. We are expecting her at any moment, though, because the court will be closing for the day very shortly indeed. But just to bring you up to speed on this case, it centred on a series, numerous phone calls that were made to, and in fact, I'm seeing some movement behind. This may be her. We're just going to come off the sticks here, off the tripod, just to get some shots as she comes out. We're just, I'll stay out of vision so you can see here Claudia Webbe coming out. I don't know if she will speak to us at this stage. The usual people outside court cheering, unfortunately. But there you see Claudia Webbe. We'll just go over, see if she'll be able to speak to us. Are you sorry to your victim? So there you've heard it. She's not said anything. She's not said anything to the media there as she has been leaving court here. And apologies if you're hearing any bad language. There's one or two people that are shouting at the media as they pass by this way. Again, I do apologise if you're hearing any of this bad language that's coming from, I think he was actually in court earlier today from what I could see. But Claudia Webbe heading down the street there. We really need to hand back to you because we just can't continue. Well, actually, this gentleman has just headed off now. He may be coming back this way, so we're just going to sort of stand out of the way in the hope that he moves away and doesn't continue with his abuse to members of the press there. He has indeed gone. So hopefully I can continue that. Apologies once again to those viewers who may have heard that man shouting and swearing there. But Claudia Webbe, as she left the court, I asked her if she was sorry to her victim, Michelle Merritt, and she didn't say anything. It appears, is continuing this stance that she adopted at the trial, that she believes that she is the victim in this case, that it was taken out of context, these calls, these numerous telephone calls that were made to Michelle Merritt over a period of time from September of 2018 right up until the 26th of April last year. Telephone calls that consisted of threats to attack this woman with acid, also telling her 11 times, shouting at her to get out of our relationship, threatening as well in one telephone call that she would send videos and pictures, naked videos and pictures, apparently, of Michelle Merritt to Michelle Merritt's daughters. Well, Michelle Merritt was in court today, and very traumatised she sounded too. We couldn't see her. She was appearing behind a curtain because of the concern about her, she said herself, her own safety. She said she'd been traumatised by this continued harassment over a period of time. She said she was scared to answer her own front door, that it had really left it had destroyed the relationship, the friendship that she had had with Lester Thomas, a partner, now fiancé, we understand, of Claudia Webbe, and that she had sought treatment at the doctors, that she's been traumatised and still suffering that trauma today, and she believes that she will be the victim of reprisals no matter the outcome today. Well, the outcome, as far as the judge was concerned, who didn't believe any of the assertions that were put forward by Claudia Webbe at her trial, that this had somehow been misconstrued, taken out of context, what she was saying. I'll hand back to the studio now.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about the sentencing, Mark. I mean, is it 10 weeks suspended sentence and 200 hours of community service? Do we sort of quite know how that's going to translate? What sort of things that does she have an option of what she does to pay that community service?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was just told to wrap there. Do you want to continue or not?
enjoying it? Don't you go anywhere. We're going to make you work for your money. Let's talk about Claudia's sentence. 10 weeks suspended and 200 hours of community service. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. It is 200 hours of unpaid community work that she will have to undertake over the months ahead. She's been told that the custodial sentence of 10 weeks has been suspended for 2 years, so warned that she commit any further offences in that 2-year period, then she will be immediately the subject of a custodial sentence. As I was saying to you before, with regard to the offences that she was accused of committing, there were these repeated phone calls that took place, and the threats, of course, to send that video and pictures to the woman's daughters. But Claudia Webbe had claimed that she was actually the victim in this case, that she had been subject to a coercive and controlling relationship. Well, she is now, we understand, and this came out in the trial last month, she is engaged to that man who she claimed was controlling her. So in terms of the MP's future as an MP, the Labour Party have asked her to resign from the Leicester East constituency. No sign that she wants to do that. The ball, I guess, is in her own constituents' court now. They can call for her a by-election in that constituency if they get 10% of the electorate in that constituency to call for that. But no sign that the woman herself, Claudia Webbe, intends to stand down. That's not something she plans to do. As I say, she still very much looks upon herself as the victim here.
Mark, thank you very much for that update and good work. Now, an investigation conducted by the British Medical Journal has heard from a whistleblower regarding data integrity into the Pfizer vaccine trial. We'll be getting the latest next after the break. You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. A new British Medical Journal investigation has heard from a whistleblower that was engaged in Pfizer's pivotal COVID-19 vaccine trial. The evidence raises serious questions about the data integrity issues in the Pfizer vaccine. Well, let's get more on this with my good friend, Dr. Aseem Malhotra, consultant cardiologist. Happy Diwali, Aseem, first of all.
Happy Diwali to you, Alex. And I think many people don't know you're a Hindu convert yourself.
Well, I do have my Hindu ways about me. It is true. Right, let's talk Pfizer. What is going on here with this BMJ article? It's criticising the actual vaccine trials of Pfizer.
It's really quite devastating for Pfizer, in my view. So what's come out in this BMJ investigation is a whistleblower at one of the Pfizer vaccine sites involved in the pivotal trial that was involved in ultimately making policies on rolling out their vaccine, has said that essentially on one of those sites there was evidence of falsifying data, not following up on adverse events. And what's made worse by this, Alex, is that the whistleblower contacted the regulator, the FDA in America, and they didn't do anything about it. Paul Thacker, the investigative journalist for the BMJ, said also, he said, where is the FBI? Why is there not a criminal investigation going into this? So this is very concerning. But let's just take a step back for a second. For me, as a doctor, as an activist, someone who's looked at research integrity over many years, it's not really that surprising, even though it's shocking, because if you look at the history of drug companies generally, there has been a problem for a very long time with corruption of data, hiding data on harms, not sharing data, which then means that doctors and patients are basically having to make decisions on biased information. And when I say that this hasn't been rectified, I mean, that's the other issue. Between 2009 and 2014, for example, most of the top 10, without naming an individual company, most of the top 10 pharmaceutical companies paid a total of $13 billion in fines for criminal activity, which involved hiding data on harms, illegal marketing of drugs, for example. And there's nothing that's been done. The BMJ pointed out this before. Nothing's been done to rectify the situation. Now, let's just talk, because I don't want this discussion to become into one where people watching it suddenly saying the vaccine doesn't work, we shouldn't take it. Let's just put things in context. It's really important. So from a personal perspective, if you go back to earlier this year, I had the vaccine. I've had both doses. Why did I have it as a doctor? Well, I'm a doctor, and I was sold on the idea, Alex, from the original Pfizer trial, that this vaccine would prevent transmission. I am not at very high risk, okay? So for me, people in middle age, COVID, for someone like me, is equivalent to having the flu in terms of its risk. So I was doing it to protect others. I've had many vaccines before in the past, and I do that to protect my patients. We now know, it's very clear, that the vaccine does not have any significant effect on preventing transmission. Now, why is that important? It changes the whole conversation. Only this week, Sajid Javid has said that he's going to make sure that all NHS workers should be vaccinated and make a mandate for that, despite the fact that medical leadership, the chair of the BMA, chair of the medical royal colleges have said this is a very bad idea, and I agree with them. We shouldn't be doing this. It should be about informed consent, because actually, if you mandate these sorts of vaccines, especially on non-transparent data that we know now, and it doesn't stop transmission, it will only widen the chasm of distrust. The other thing to add in as well, Alex, is we know about 105,000 NHS workers have not had the vaccine, not even a single dose, because they are hesitant. Now, if you mandate it and they decide, you know, for good reason, they decide that they don't want to have the vaccine, you're going to lose massive amounts of NHS staff when it's already under pressure. If Sajid Javid wants to destroy the NHS, this is exactly the way to do it. I will say to him, please make a U-turn, row back on this, because this could be very devastating for the NHS.
Well, massively important topic, and thank you for bringing it to our attention, Aseem. Lovely to have you back in the studio. Now, you're watching the Afternoon Agenda. Lots more to come, so don't go anywhere. And welcome if you've just joined the Afternoon Agenda. I'm Alex Phillips, and this show is all about what I think, what you think, and what my guests think. It's not news as you know it, but discussion and debate on things that are or should be on your agenda. Still to come this afternoon, the Scottish law student who is suing her university after a row over her statements that women have vaginas. We'll speak to her live. Plus, it's Diwali today, the Festival of Lights. It's a special day for the whole Hindu community and, of course, Sikhs, Jains and some Buddhists. We'll be delving into how it is celebrated around the world this hour. And it may not be on the agenda of traditional outlets, but we need to talk about comedy. You've heard what some of my guests have said already about this, but we've got more to come this hour. That's the agenda. But what's on yours? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me @gbnews. First, it's time for the news headlines.
Alex, thank you. I'm Polly Middlehurst, and these are your GB News headlines at 5 o'clock. An MP who threatened to throw acid at another woman has avoided jail. Claudia Webbe, who was handed a 10-week term, suspended for 2 years, had been charged with harassing Michelle Merritt. She was also given 200 hours community service. The Chief Magistrate described her behaviour as callous and intimidatory. Webbe says she plans to appeal. Meanwhile, Owen Paterson is resigning as the MP for North Shropshire. The former Tory cabinet minister who faced suspension for breaching lobbying rules said in a statement, "The last 2 years have been an indescribable nightmare for my family and me. I maintain that I'm totally innocent of what I have been accused of." And he finished, "I will remain a public servant, but outside the cruel world of politics." Well, that announcement came after the government decided to hold a second vote on parliamentary disciplinary procedures. Thousands of care home staff could lose their jobs next week because they aren't fully vaccinated against COVID. NHS data shows that over 49,000 workers, around 1 in 10, haven't received 2 doses. The government has made it mandatory for employees in registered care homes in England to have both jabs. The first pill designed to treat coronavirus has been approved by the UK medicines regulator. The tablet will be given to patients recently diagnosed with COVID and those who are vulnerable to illnesses like diabetes or heart disease. In clinical trials, the drug, developed by a US company, cut the risk of hospitalisation and death. Cervical cancer rates are almost 90% lower in women who've had the HPV vaccine as children. A study published in The Lancet found those in their 20s who'd had the dose between the ages of 12 and 13 were far less likely to develop the disease in later life compared with those who are unvaccinated. Cancer Research UK described the findings as historic. More than 40 countries, including the UK, have pledged to quit using coal. That's the single biggest contributor to climate change. The commitments were made during the COP26 summit in Glasgow following a UK-led coal to clean power transition plan. Countries, including Poland, Vietnam and Chile, have vowed to phase out coal power in the 2030s. Poorer nations will have until the 2040s. Australia, India, China and the US, some of the largest consumers of coal, however, did not sign up to the pledge. But COP26 President Alok Sharma remains optimistic.
I do believe that the end of coal is in sight. I do believe we're getting to a point where we consign coal power to history. A brighter future comes ever closer, a future of cleaner air, cheaper power and good green jobs.
Police in Western Australia have charged a 36-year-old man in connection with the abduction of 4-year-old Cleo Smith. She was taken from her family's tent in a campsite more than 2 weeks ago and then was found in a house just yesterday morning. Police have also released their recording of the moment she was discovered.
What's your name? You're right. What's your name? What's your name, sweetheart?
My name is Cleo.
Your name is Cleo.
Hello, Cleo.
The cricketer Azim Rafiq says the problem with a racial slur used against him by a teammate is about institutional racism rather than the actual words themselves. Posting on Twitter, the 30-year-old who played for Yorkshire County Cricket Club said the sport he loved needs reform and change. The former England cricketer Gary Ballance has admitted using a slur against Rafiq and said that he regrets saying it. A bird flu prevention zone has been declared across Britain after a rise in detection of the disease. It'll be a legal requirement now for all bird keepers to follow strict biosecurity measures to help protect their flocks. The chief veterinary officers of England, Wales and Scotland say the actions must be taken now to prevent the bird flu spreading further to other poultry and domestic birds. Officials say the risk to the public is, though, very low. That's it from me. I'm back in half an hour. Until then, it's time to go back to the afternoon agenda.
You're with the Afternoon Agenda on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, and we're talking comedy. If I think of some of my favourite jokes over the years, or snort laugh at some of the most hilarious memes my rather unsavoury friends send to me, almost all of them wouldn't pass muster with the self-appointed offensatrons who have seemingly decided that all joy should be banished from our lives. As the definition of what's funny and what's not has evolved over time, mother-in-law jokes became a bit cringe once short-haul flights emancipated ordinary Brits from the routines of redcoats. It seems to me it went through a particularly scathing period under comics such as Frankie Boyle before crashing and burning into the embers of laughter that once was. It's a tragedy that so many of us now have been sucked into a sad centrifuge of censorship, painfully realising that many of the shows we were brought up with, from 'Allo 'Allo to Little Britain, just couldn't get made today without a league of joyless ninnies calling for the creators' banishment. Instead, humour is now trapped inside certain bubbles, shared secretly like prohibition alcohol, stealthily pinged to WhatsApp groups, and increasingly controversial and cutting when limited to a closed audience inside a circle of trust. Those trying to push laughter outside the limits of acceptability actually risk turning wit into the weapon they already claim it to be. But can laughter be salvaged? And who gets to decide what is good, honest fun and what crosses the line? Either way, surely it is incumbent on all right-minded people to make sure it's not the cynical, censorious, sad sack social justice warriors who have the last laugh before we let go one of the greatest gifts of being a human being. Well, let's get more on this with my next guest. Joining me now is Steve Bennett, editor of the weekly comedy website Chortle. Steve, great to have you aboard. Have you found this sort of constant censorship creep? Has it affected you and your website and the sort of content you produce?
No, I don't really see it as censorship, as more just evolution. Like you say, there was a time when we did mother-in-law jokes all the time or stupid Irish jokes all the time. And really, we just moved away from that. And the thing that kills comedy is not having new ideas come in at the bottom. And so maybe the new ideas are alien to an older brigade, but it's just comedy moving on.
There are a number of comedians who have sort of raised their voice and said, I'm worried that I think my material now just wouldn't be acceptable anymore, and I have to really think long and hard and self-audit or perhaps even self-censor when it comes to producing work. I mean, comedians such as Billy Connolly and Jennifer Saunders, you know, big names. Is that just, as you said, a case of history changing what we find funny and what we find acceptable along with social mores? Or is there something more sinister going on when these greats of the comedic canon in the UK are standing up and saying we're concerned?
I don't think it's more sinister. I do. It's largely a generational thing, I think you'll find. And also, you know, looking back at when alternative comedians like Rick Mail and etc. came on the scene, all the old guard then said, oh, this is terrible. The alternative comedy means it's only funny every other line. But it's just moving on. And there are probably some people in comedy who are overly pious, but I think it'll rectify itself. It'll sort itself out. And it's not entirely being sidelined. I mean, there's a big debate in comedy at the moment about Dave Chappelle, who's got a Netflix special. He's paid $20 million for a special, and he's accused of transphobia. So you can say, oh, look, the censorious lot are out saying he shouldn't say this, but he's being paid £20 million to be on stand-up's biggest platform. He's not exactly being silenced.
Yeah, so do you think actually at the end of the day comedy will win out? And even though there's a very vocal group, the mob might shout down certain people, certain acts, certain jokes, that actually comedians will carry on regardless?
I think so, especially in live comedy clubs where, you know, the situation is everything. And there is always a bit of, you know, with the best comedy, certainly a bit of tension with the audience. Maybe you are pushing them to what they don't want to hear, whether that's on the sort of liberal side or on the conservative side. You're pushing them to areas of slight discomfort and then perhaps pulling them back in again with a joke. I think there's a lot less scope for being misunderstood and a bit more scope for nuance in the club than seeing a joke on Twitter or, look, isn't this outrageous type comment on Twitter. So yeah, I go to the clubs a lot, and I don't feel that comedy is being neutered, but it's different from when it was 20 years ago for sure.
And where does that leave you? I mean, in terms of a comedy website, you don't have that live audience thing. You have got sort of recorded material, things that are sort of established and there on your site that, you know, age with the times. Do you ever look back and think, well, I think it's time to remove that content now? Or do you ever put, I don't know, trigger warnings saying some people might find this offensive? Or do you just say, no, it's funny, it stays there, come at me, do your worst, I'm not changing?
Well, we're actually a website that writes about comedy in a sort of journalistic way rather than producing too much content. But any sort of reviews or opinion pieces that are from the past, they stay there. The only warning says this was published in whatever year it was published. Again, look, I think some of the trigger warning stuff is kind of okay. If you're saying, if you're putting up an episode of an old sitcom, Are You Being Served or something, and it's got trigger warnings that some of the language in that might be offensive to you in today's climate, well, that's fine. You get the best of both worlds. I think you get the show is still there and available to watch. And if you are what you might want to call a delicate snowflake, you don't need to watch it and go and find something that will appeal to you.
Well said, that man. Thank you, Steve Bennett, editor of Chortle Comedy website. Let's continue this conversation with comedian and musician Jonathan Cogan. Jonathan, did you hear what Steve had to say? He thinks well, you're very dark there, Jonathan. Steve says that trigger warnings, well, it's fine. You get the best of both worlds. You get told that you might find this offensive, but, you know, if you're not going to, watch it and enjoy it. Do you agree with that? Or do you think the whole idea of even putting a trigger warning over comedy is sort of a censorship creep into an industry that really relies on being risque?
So it's a good question. So I do definitely agree with Steve in the sense that if you have the trigger warning, but you still have the original piece of art that hasn't been changed, you do kind of have the best of both worlds. You've got the original message or language that was used, and you've got that kind of modern, I guess, look at it. But at the same time, it's not something I would want personally on the media I consume. I think you kind of have that to an extent with ratings. If something's not going to be suitable for a kid, you know, don't show it to them. But generally, I don't think trigger warnings are too important, especially not from my perspective. But then again, I've only got like a medium amount of trauma in my life. So if you've got like huge amount of terrible memories, then maybe you do need that. But, you know, each their own.
And do you find yourself self-auditing? I mean, let's take, for example, Dave Chappelle, who was really dragged through the coals for, you know, previous shows on Netflix and has really come back punching. Is that the right sort of approach to take and sort of to make light and actually turn cancel culture into comedy?
Okay, well, I mean, whether you like him or not, Dave Chappelle is like undeniably fantastic at what he does. You don't have to like it, you don't have to agree with him, but in terms of skill and talent, he's really one of the best. Now, what's kind of interesting is he's at the crux of this cultural debate because he spent a lot of his performance time talking about injustices to do with race. And he's always been a bit of like a hero in regard to that. And now he's taking the flack from being on perceived as the wrong side of the debate with the gender issue. Now, is he getting cancelled in a sense? I mean, I know his documentary that he wanted to show has been dropped from a bunch of film festivals, so he's been cancelled in that regard. But at the same time, he's absolutely world famous, making loads of money from Netflix and drawing huge audiences. So cancel's kind of, it's sort of subjective to how much exposure you can get without certain gatekeepers allowing you in. But do I think if people disagree with you, they should try and take your livelihood away? Absolutely not. Should they not watch you if they don't like you? Yeah. But at the same time, doesn't mean I think people should be horrendously offensive just to try and hurt people. I don't think that's good comedy. I think that's just bullying. But at the same time, jokes are going to sometimes offend, and that's just the nature of the art form. Yeah, it's tricky. It's an age-old question. I don't know.
You find yourself, when you're producing your material, sort of self-limiting sometimes and thinking, God, I'd love to tell that joke. I really want to put that pun in there, but it might be a little bit on the edge and it could cause me trouble.
So if I say a joke and then my girlfriend just walks out the room, that's normally a good indicator that it's just slightly over the line. But I think you are just going to have to experiment live with it and see what the reaction is. Not everyone's going to like it. I've had jokes that have gone down super well in certain gigs, and then another time, I literally once had a girl from the audience shout out, "No," at one of my punchlines. So I learned a lesson that day. And And I guess it's kind of up to me. I really think it's up to me, or it's up to the comedian to choose what they want to put in and then just deal with the consequences. As long as those consequences are people liking it or not liking it, not getting like mobbed for having the wrong opinion about an issue that week. Yeah.
Jonathan, if the consequence is people laughing, you're doing a good job. And stick with the comedy, don't become a lighting director. Lovely to have you on the show today. Jonathan Cogan, comedian and musician, looking like a silhouette there, wasn't he? This is what's happened when it's all about zooming into programmes these days. What happens, though, if the laughter does stop altogether? Laughter has been seen to be so important to us humans. My next guest will know a lot about this. Joining me now is behavioural psychologist Jo Hemmings. Jo, OK, laughter is the best medicine, they say. Is that true?
Yeah, definitely. The best free medicine you can get, because it actually increases our endorphins, which is our body's natural hormone that makes us feel good. It decreases cortisol and adrenaline, which are our stress hormones. I won't bore on about it too much, but it improves our immune system. It relaxes our muscles. So after you've had a laugh, 45 minutes later, up to 45 minutes later, you're still feeling good. Your muscles are very relaxed. It's bonding in a pro-social way. So laughter's contagious. So when someone is laughing, it's quite hard not to laugh with them. And yeah, I mean, as a dating coach, I know that single people looking for love will say that a sense of humour, what they mean is a shared sense of humour, but a sense of humour is right up there in the top rankings of what they want in a partner, is someone who can laugh with them, laugh at themselves, just generally laugh.
Am I thinking as well that there is such a thing as laughter therapy?
There's laughter yoga, there's laughter therapy. I mean, it all sounds quite artificial, but I think people who've done it, it does feel a bit odd at first when you're encouraged to laugh in that sort of slightly kind of fake ho, ho, ho way. But because it has this really contagious nature about it, you'll find that once you've sort of forced out a few laughs, it starts escalating and you begin to laugh quite naturally. So it's an amazing thing. Our lives would be a lot more miserable without laughter in them.
Interesting words. You talked about laughter as being bonding in a pro-social way. To me, the biggest risk of cancel culture is exactly that. It's dividing us. And very often, comedy is used to de-escalate a situation or to take the stress out of something or turn something really miserable or combative into something happy and binding.
Yeah, I suppose it's the difference between, look, comedy, when you're actually on a stage or on TV performing, that's a certain sort of humour. I think laughter also comes from, it's all humour in that way. Comedy's always been on the margins. It will probably always stay on the margins, but those margins change a little bit because there's always something good about laughing about something which is just slightly probably not to be laughed at. But spontaneous laughter, when you're with family or friends and you just find something to giggle at, that is such a bonding thing between people, recognising you have similar senses of humour, recognising that you're able to just, collapse into that slightly hysterical giggling and feel comfortable about it. It's just enormously good for us. I don't think any amount of cancel culture can ever get rid of that spontaneity of giggling, laughing with somebody that you know well, that you can connect with, that you feel relaxed and comfortable with. So there will always be a part of humour that's going to be a bit debatable and it will evolve, as both of your other guests have said. But there's also that very spontaneous laughter that can come out of nowhere with people that you're just having a good time with.
Also psychologically important to tell people it's better to actually not take offence at things than to take offence at things, because it seems to me almost those who go around with their sort of offence diviners, trying to pick up some sort of horror story or historic tweets from someone anywhere, they must have pretty miserable lives.
Look, there are kind of mood hoovers everywhere, whether it's in comedy or politics, whatever it is, there's always people that want to kind of slightly bring you down. There is a way of being funny and humorous by being sharp, witty, clever, without being offensive. And most good comedians know exactly those boundaries that they can step in and step out. And yeah, for those who just want to kind of cancel, everything we might find funny, it's their issue. I wonder sometimes what they do laugh at. Do they have any laughter in their lives? Is there any self-deprecation? That's a really important part of laughter. To be able to laugh at yourself is actually one of the best forms of humour. And I sort of suspect those that want to cancel everybody out there don't have a lot of that going on.
I couldn't agree with you more, Jo Hemmings. I'm telling you, first few months at GB News weren't always a laughing matter, but we got through it. Jo Hemmings, behavioural psychologist. Fantastic having you on. Well, coming up, we'll have the latest on the Scottish law student who is suing her university after she was investigated, wait for this, for saying women have, drumroll please, vaginas. But first, it's the weather forecast.
Hi there. Still some showers around this afternoon, but for most, it's a cracking afternoon, dry and bright. Still feeling on the cold side before it turns a bit milder during the next few days. A change in the weather on the way. We're cutting off the cold northerly winds that we've seen over the last few days. We're replacing them with westerlies, but during the next 24 hours, well, that's the transition period. And so for many, showers easing this evening, clearing skies then, a touch of frost overnight. Initially for parts of southern Scotland, much of England and Wales, but through the night, areas of cloud sink south from the northwest, with some light outbreaks of rain in places. But of course, that cloud blanket will lift the temperatures in the north, whilst it will be another frosty start in the south, with temperatures in rural spots a little below freezing. Nevertheless, that's where the brightest skies will be first thing, London, Norwich, much of southeast England seeing that sunshine until around lunchtime. Elsewhere, the cloud continues to topple southwards, and by the afternoon, actually, most places are seeing these layers of cloud. But there will still be some sunny breaks, and temperatures will be a little higher, 11 to 13 Celsius generally, and most will see a dry day. But there will be some light outbreaks of rain for parts of north and west Scotland, northwest England and North Wales. For bonfire night, it looks like reasonable weather for most fireworks displays, I should imagine. But through the night, particularly after midnight, it turns wet and windy in the north and west of Scotland, and then later on parts of Northern Ireland. This more active weather system moving in will lead to heavy rain, particularly over the West Highlands on the morning of Saturday. A mild start to the day everywhere, but a wet start there for western Scotland with some strong winds. The winds turn even stronger in the far north and northwest on Saturday night, tending to be a little drier further south and also milder.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. A Scottish law student who was investigated for saying women have vaginas during an online seminar on transgender issues is suing her university for an alleged breach of the Equality Act. Lisa was investigated by Abertay University in Dundee after classmates complained that she made inappropriate comments during a seminar that could be construed as discriminatory. The university says it can't comment on the case. Well, let's talk about the issues around this. Why are statements like this considered offensive? I'm now joined by Lisa Keogh, the student suing Abertay University, and Katie John Went, a trans person who is a diversity and inclusion facilitator. So let's start with you, Lisa. What exactly did you say and why did you say it?
So I said, I was asked to define a woman, so I did. I said a woman is someone that's born with a vagina and in most cases the ability to reproduce. I also argued that men have, obviously, they're stronger than women. They've got higher physical strength than women, which apparently was transphobic of me to say, because I'd said, obviously, Fallon Fox should not have been allowed to fight with a biological woman in the MMA fight. And I also stated that not all men were rapists, which, again, I stand by. Not all men are rapists.
And the reaction to that was that some of your classmates took what you were saying to be deliberately provocative or controversial or bullying?
So I don't know why they took offence to it. I think basically when I said that only women have, well, I didn't actually say only women have got vaginas. I said women have got vaginas. So when I said that, I think I sort of put a target on my back. And after I said that, they basically looked to take offence to everything that I said after that. I mean, I could have said the sky was blue and they would have somehow taken offence to that.
OK, Katie, let's go to you now. Do you understand why there might have been a bit of hullabaloo after what Lisa said in the classroom, or do you think that this is sort of, completely getting overspun and that people are trying to whip up offence when there shouldn't be offence there to be taken?
I don't think people are necessarily trying to whip up offence, but I do believe that people will take offence, and far fewer people actually give offence than those who necessarily take offence. And one of the dilemmas is that we can be overly sensitive, I might argue. And I think one of the problems we have is we no longer regard universities as a safe space for discussion. They're just a safe space. So you can't even hold opinions that might be different. But actually to say that women have vaginas shouldn't be a controversial viewpoint. I mean, we can see that, the last couple of weeks, the number of politicians, 3 of them men, who were all asked, who has cervixes, and they went, oh, I don't know, I can't answer that question because I'll get in trouble if I answer it. And we've created this ludicrous situation where we can't state facts and also we can't state opinions. And that is what I find worrying. It's less about giving and taking offence, because the biggest problem is the number of people who will choose to take offence. And there is a smaller number, as I say, though, who actually set out to be disrespectful or offensive. From what Lisa's saying, it doesn't sound like she set out to be that in any way, shape or form, but that people, found it offensive. And that's a different matter. And the university found in that same regard, I understand.
Lisa, have you ever experienced anything like that before at university? And did it surprise you when that happened and the sort of vitriol about the response to what you said?
So no, I'd never experienced anything like that at uni before. Generally, I'd kept my head down, got on with work. I didn't really socialise with anyone at university. So when we were doing the online discussions, obviously I took part in all discussions, but I was quite quiet at uni, so I'd never experienced anything like this, and I was absolutely surprised when they took offence to it. So obviously when I was asked to define a woman, I said women have got vaginas, and they all sort of called me transphobic, and I didn't know about any of this debate or anything at that point, so it was a Teams call. So what I did was I typed it in, what I said, I typed it so that they could see that I wasn't being transphobic, I was just stating fact. So again, I don't know why they took offence to it. It was not an offensive statement, and had I not been asked to define a woman, I would never have said it anyway.
And Katie, do you think this sort of extreme attitude towards finding so much stuff transphobic, especially when it comes to saying women have vaginas, which frankly they do. Well, I don't know, I would say that's my opinion, but I kind of think it's in biology textbooks as well. Do you think that this is becoming harmful now to the trans community, and rather than bring people together and people become accepting of each other, it's creating further divisions?
Yeah, it's totally taking further divisions. I only have to check out my own Facebook page in the last week because of the number of friends who have split ranks over the whole thing, and they're all mostly friends from the lesbian community and lesbian feminists, and half, one large group are saying no, trans women are women, absolutely no question about it, and the others are saying women and sex is a single sex characteristic protected and only women have vaginas, and these are actually mostly women arguing with women over the language that is used around it, because this is where it harms the trans community. It's because for many, many years, right up until I would probably say 2016, 17, most trans people just got on with life. Most trans people were accepted into female spaces where appropriate, and there wasn't a big issue. What we've created a dilemma with is the way we've chosen to suggest the improvement of the Gender Recognition Act and self-ID has created this massive new scare factor that someone will simply be able to say, I am a woman, and walk into a woman's space. And that is quite different from someone who, say, has been through 6 or 7 years of hell on the NHS and therapy and various things, and chosen very often sometimes as a last resort to transition to overcome gender dysphoria, a recognized psychiatric condition, and is, generally speaking, has been accepted. So I would say that you've probably got a minority of trans people who've become very gender critical themselves. I wouldn't call myself gender critical, but I would call myself critical of gender. And equally, a smaller group of trans on the other end of the spectrum who've become almost near absolutist trans activists, and a bulk of trans people in the middle who just want to say, please leave us alone. Please don't put us in the news every day. Please just let us live our lives. And we'll be quite happy probably to say, instead of like the trans women are women mantra, or only women have cervixes and vaginas, and ending up with these two either biology versus gender mantras, just to simply say trans people have human rights too. And many people who are caught up in this, and as Lisa was saying, almost, I didn't realize this was a big issue until I got caught into it, and then it becomes an issue, and then everyone makes you take a side. And it's that, and I hate the fact that there's now a litmus test of how woke or accepting or inclusive you are based on which side of the divide you take. And the worst place you can be is someone who's willing to listen to both sides. Someone who's willing to engage is the absolute no-no. And I therefore really struggle to see how this is going to change, how we're going to create a safe space for discussion. I would gladly sit down with Lisa and debate biology and gender till the cows come home, but I'm not going to get offended by it. So that's my choice, sir, and I think that is an issue.
It is indeed. Well, listen, it's wonderful to have you both on talking about this, and glad to put you two together as well. Lisa Keogh and Katie John West being very sensible about the fact that women have vaginas. Still to come on the afternoon agenda, coronavirus infections in England are the highest they have ever been. Yep, we'll have all of that next. But first, let's get the latest headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Alex, thank you. The latest headlines this hour on GB News. MP Claudia Webbe, who threatened to throw acid at another woman, has avoided jail. She was given a 10-week term, suspended for 2 years and 200 hours community service for harassing Michelle Merritt. Webbe says she plans to appeal. The Prime Minister says he's very sad to hear that Owen Paterson, who he described as a friend and colleague for decades, will resign as the MP for North Shropshire. In a statement, the former Cabinet Minister, who faced suspension for breaching lobbying rules, said, "The last 2 years have been an indescribable nightmare for my family and me. I will remain a public servant, but outside the cruel world of politics." The first pill designed to treat coronavirus has been approved by the UK medicines regulator. The tablet will be given to patients recently diagnosed with COVID and those who are vulnerable to illnesses like diabetes or heart disease. In clinical trials, the drug, developed by a US company, cut the risk of hospitalisation and death. More than 40 countries, including the UK, have pledged to quit using coal. Countries including Poland, Vietnam and Chile have vowed to phase out coal power use by the 2030s. Poorer nations have until the 2040s. Australia, India, China and the US, however, some of the largest consumers of coal, did not sign up to the pledge. Those are the latest news headlines. I'm back in half an hour.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. Coronavirus infections in England are the highest they have ever been, according to a study which has been collecting data since May 2020. The findings suggest the increase is being driven by high rates among school-aged children. 12 to 15-year-olds in England are eligible for COVID vaccines, but data shows the uptake is slow. Joining me now is microbiologist from the University of Bath, Andrew Preston. Andrew, great to have you on. How worried should we be about these rising COVID cases? And is this to be expected? If people aren't vaccinated, they're going to catch it?
Yeah, I mean, this is part of a longer-term trend, really. So we get these little peaks, and then we get a few days where it seems to drop off again. So I think it's the longer-term trajectory that's really key. And clearly, we've had pretty high case rates for some time now. But as the report mentioned, this is a pretty considerable driver for this is the school-age kids, who, of course, have only recently really been eligible for the vaccines. And certainly, I don't necessarily think the uptake of the vaccines amongst the 12 to 15-year-olds is low. I think to some degree, the accessibility has been pretty slow across certain parts of the country. So I think that those are coming together to give the rates that have been reported over the last month or so.
One thing I'm struggling to wrap my head around in the whole COVID debate over vaccines is how much they actually reduce transmission, how much they have an impact on the COVID numbers going up. Is it the case that if you are vaccinated, you're less likely to be able to pass it on, or does that not come into play?
Probably there is a reduction, but of course it's not absolute. So yes, you can still catch COVID. Largely protects you from the more serious manifestations of it, but you can still pass it on. And so it's quite clear that amongst those daily case rates, there are perhaps slightly increasing numbers of those that were double vaccinated, but are still susceptible, particularly to this Delta variant. That's what's really driving this. But it's a really key part of helping to suppress the virus. So it's around perhaps a 50% protection from symptomatic disease being double jabbed with one of the vaccines on offer in the UK.
And as a microbiologist, are you concerned about the rising case numbers? I mean, when I go about my daily life, it looks very much like the old normal is back and here to stay. Do you think we're being a bit too blasé, or as long as it's not converting into huge numbers of people becoming hospitalised, should we just relax and be, fairly comfortable about community transmission?
This depends, it's really down to where your personal sort of comfort with the risk that is involved. And we've been making that decision, I think, on an individual basis since the start of the pandemic. I think for many people, that double jabbed was the signal that they've done what they can to protect themselves and protect their loved ones from COVID. And we're now faced with the question, what level of COVID are we prepared to live with as we sort of, as you say, return to normal, and what level of suppression are we prepared to live with, given that will also have collateral damage with obviously the effect on people's liberties, mental health, and of course other health services. And I don't think there's really been a clear strategy to say, well, this is the level that we're prepared to accept, or to say to people, look, you can have complete opening and unlocking, but this is the consequence in terms of the numbers of people that are likely to die. And of course, a large part of that is we don't actually know what's going to happen in the coming months, and certainly not, say, in a year's time. So there's a great deal of uncertainty in trying to navigate a path forward.
Andrew, thank you so much for coming on and discussing this with me today. That's Andrew Preston, microbiologist at the University of Bath. Now, how much do you know about Diwali? Probably not as much as you might, since it's a 5-day festival celebrated by millions of people around the world, including a big celebration in London's Trafalgar Square. Well, it's one of the major festivals celebrated by Hindus, Jains, Sikhs and some Buddhists, 3 million of whom live right here in the UK. Given that Indian culture has had such a huge influence on us, why is it still something we seem to know so little about? Well, let's talk now to Hindu philosopher Akandadi Das, famed, of course, for his dulcet tones on Radio 4's Thought for the Day. Thank you for joining me. It's a pleasure having you on, Akandadi. Let's first of all talk about Diwali. And for people out there who don't know about Diwali, which, of course, the peak really is today, can you explain the festival, its origins and how people celebrate it?
Okay, well, thank you very much, Alex. Thanks for inviting me on. Happy Diwali to you and
Happy Diwali to you.
All your listeners and viewers. Yes, you're right. This festival is celebrated over 5 days, and really it's a conglomeration of many other kind of traditions, stories that go back into antiquity, and somehow or other become condensed within these 5 days. But today is the big day of Diwali, and specifically Diwali takes its name from this word diva, or diva, which it means a light. And this goes back to the story of Ram and Sita, and this story can be taken, I suppose, in many different ways. It's a great, thrilling epic of heroism and good fighting against evil, and how Sita was kidnapped, and how Ram, with the help of all his allies, managed to win her back. So it's a great story, but underlying it, there are the spiritual messages. And I think for more devout Hindus, they will look at this and think that this is a story that is calling on us, that in this world where we find difficulty and conflict and suffering, that if we turn our attention to developing our relationship with God and seek help from a spiritual source, then we might find extra strength and inspiration to really deal with not just the issues in our own life, but to become an active servant and contributor to the benefit and lives of others.
Now, one thing that strikes me as someone who's lived in India, I love Hinduism and Hindu philosophy, is that when people find this out about me, they usually say, oh, that's that religion with all those different gods, and where if you're bad, you become a slug and things like that. And it's very different to that. To me, it's very much a collection of philosophies, especially metaphysics. Why is it that in the West we seem to have created this strange caricature of Hinduism, yet we seem to also simultaneously borrow so much from it?
Well, that's very true. I think it's because Hinduism is not one creed. It is not. It can't simply be put in a box like many other religions can be defined, because you're talking about a spiritual tradition that has evolved over thousands and thousands of years. It does go back to the Vedic teachings, which is a huge body of literatures, and each with their own lines of teachers who have emphasized maybe particular aspects of it. So within Hinduism, it's not just one philosophy or one idea, but actually there's a conglomeration of all these different views on how life can be lived in a spiritual way, in an uplifting way, in a way that offers service to others. So that's why it looks very complex. And but at the same time, there are certain themes going through it. And you're right, some of those themes have been borrowed into, a Western society. The whole principle of yoga is something that is inherent within the spiritual path. And the idea, as you say, with the metaphysics, is that there is a kind of message. We don't think of Hinduism as being a member of a religion. Rather, it's the personal adoption of a spiritual path which actually is being shared by all humans. The idea is that each one of us is a conscious being. I'm alive, I feel things, I am conscious, I'm sentient. And that sentience is not a product of our body and our brain, but rather I am an entity of consciousness. And that's true for me, and it's true for not just all humans, but actually all life. And that we are connected with all life because we pass through one life after another through this process we call reincarnation, or specifically reincarnation as transmigration of the soul. In the same way, I had an old car, it broke down, I was the driver, I was not the car. Eventually gave up. I had to get out of that and go and get myself a new car. So similarly, we do that with our bodies. Unfortunately, they wear out after a certain. When we get, it isn't just a question of being punished. It's actually a question of what do we want and what do we deserve. So when I got a new car, I could think, well, I don't need the same type of car because my kids have grown up. I don't need an estate anymore to drive them, be their taxi driver. I can now think about something smaller and more suitable for myself. So my desires changed. But also, I had to think of my budget. Could I afford a nice, flashy sports car? Or could I could only afford something a little bit more modest? So in that way, we think about what we're doing in this life, what we want to go on to, and what we deserve to go on to. Those two things work together, and they're all in our own hands. So it's a message of personal responsibility.
I couldn't agree more. And you know what? Thank you, Akandadi. I could talk to you all day, but I'm coming to the end of my programme. But let's have you back on soon. Any excuse to talk about Vedic philosophy. I love it. Akandadi Das, Hindu philosopher, and happy Diwali to you too. Well,
happy Diwali.
We cut him off there. He was wishing us happy Diwali again. Now, let's go back to our main issue of the afternoon. We've been talking about comedy. Is cancel culture killing the laughter? We've had a number of guests on this topic. Comedian Abby Roberts had this to say.
I've had lots of heckles. I'm quite good with dealing with heckles, especially if they're big men built like this. I usually just drink their pint in one go and then turn the glass upside down the table. That's usually how I deal with it. It's almost like you want the atmosphere to be a bit, oh, are we going there? On the edge. You want women to, have 10 ladies just in case. You do not want somebody coming out and saying, and now, before I begin, I'd like to give you a sermon on how many pronouns there are. You do not want that in comedy. Comedy is sacred in the sense that it should be a place where everything, where the most freedom is had. And at the moment, we're seeing chip, chip, chip away at it.
Well, founder of the Glee Comedy Club, Mark Taggart, says he's concerned comedians are starting to check what they say.
I got into this business precisely because of the craziness and the anarchy and the anything goes attitude, but I'm concerned that what's creeping into my inbox, and this is a phenomenon just of the last couple of years, it's what I call professional offence taking. My fear is, and the comics that I do speak to who can talk to me candidly, they do say to me, we are auditing our act. We are checking what we say. Because if you think about it as a jobbing comic, that 3-second gag can end your life and end your career. Why take the risk?
Well, now that we've heard what some of our guests had to say, it's time, of course, for you, the viewer, to have the final word. And John says on email, cancel culture is not just killing comedy, it's killing British people's freedom of expression. Tom says there has never been anything in the handbook of art or comedy that dictates a positive, progressive message needs to be detected in its content for it to be emotionally or intellectually stimulating. Art, like comedy, can be dark, ugly and shocking. Despite this, it can still be beautiful. Barbara says the cancelled comedians should have a normal night of comedy altogether. It'll be packed out. Gareth says, if I pay to see a comedian, it's my choice, my taste. People who walk out are insane. Gary says comedy has always moved forward and older people have struggled to understand. Jimmy says people rely on phrases like cancel culture. Instead, the term is thrown around to try and legitimise offensive and dehumanising behaviour. It's not cancel culture. Jonathan says cancel culture, wokeism, etc. is just the thought police in effect. We are seeing the rise of a lunatic philosophy. Well, there you are. And here's the result of our poll. We've been asking, is cancel culture killing comedy? Oh, sad to say 96% of you say yes, it is, and 4% say no. Well, do you know what, folks? If you like comedy, if you like being funny, keep trying to make people laugh because it's what we need in life. You've been watching The Afternoon Agenda with me, Alex Phillips. That's it for me for this week. So do come back from Monday to Thursday next week, 4 p.m. till 6 p.m. Coming up next, of course, it's the wonderful Michelle Dewberry with Dubes & Co. For all of you Vedic followers out there, have a wonderful Diwali. Let's hope the auspicious day brings you light and love for the next year. Anyway, time for the weather. Bye-bye.
Hello again. A change in wind direction and therefore a change in weather during the next 24 hours. Initially clear and chilly, but then cloudier skies turn up from the north and it does turn milder as a result. We've had this cold northerly airflow during the last few days, but during the next 24 hours we replace it with more of a westerly airflow with weather fronts arriving from the Atlantic. Having said that, it's a clear and chilly evening for southern Scotland, much of England and Wales, but through the night a blanket of cloud starts to sink south across the country, lifting temperatures in the north, whilst it stays chilly and clear in the south. Frosty